All statements and opinions expressed by guests of the Adult in the Room podcast are strictly their own and do not necessarily reflect the beliefs or opinions of the host, producers, or advertisers. All interviews are presented in their most complete possible form in the interests of free speech. No statements should be interpreted as financial, legal, or medical advice. Listener and viewer discretion are strongly advised.
It's the Adult in the Room podcast with Victoria Taft. That's me. On this special episode of the Adult in the Room podcast, we answered the question, why has the homeless industrial complex become infiltrated with radical leftists who look an awful lot like Antifa, but get an awful lot of money from places that, I don't know, they look a lot like the folks in the federal government who are making all that money. Let's find out. Let's listen to Ryan Mauro about this very interesting and telling case and how he tracked down the money. Enjoy it. Yes, and how are you? Thanks so much for coming on.
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
I appreciate you coming on. This study was it's exactly what I needed to see. It just sadly confirmed a lot of my suppositions, and now you've actually, I think, confirmed everything, confirmed my worst suspicions. Tell me a little bit about Infiltrated, the ideological capture of homeless advocacy, and what you're doing about it.
Yeah, so this was interesting. So this is the second report of mine that has gotten to the desk of the President of the United States in less than a month. And the first one being about George Soros.
Yes.
Money that's going from open society foundations to pro-terrorist groups and literal domestic terrorist groups. And then that dovetailed with this project, which is with the cooperation of the Discovery Institute, who are experts in the issue of solving homelessness. And that's a new issue for me. So I learned a lot through them. They taught me about the issue and like some areas to look. And so I just started mapping out the major groups involved in what's called the housing justice movement.
Yes.
That basically stands for free housing. And as you can imagine, that attracts a lot of anarchists, anarcho-communists, Marxists, Hamas fans. A lot of radicals get attracted to that idea, even though there's plenty of good people out there that have arguments, whether you agree with them or not, that say that's a worthy cause of free housing for everybody. But that does overlap with some very bad extremist groups that are out there. And so I helped map out the extremist network. So that part of the report, that's what I was responsible for. And really, I was amazed. Like there's this one group, ATUN, Autonomous Tenants Union Network, that I came across, and it's pretty explicitly an anarchist group, but they identify themselves as tenants unions. But they make it clear on their website, it's by tenants we mean everybody, like it's Marxist, anarcho-communist revolution, and they basically say tenants that just applies to everybody. So it's revolution for everybody.
One of the you guys took a look at the amici briefs in the Grants Pass Supreme Court decision about homelessness. And it was just a stark reminder that there are a lot of groups out there who are all about helping homeless people, but there are a lot of NGOs and stuff like that you guys had mentioned in the study that had been fighting for or against rather the city of Grants Pass. And what the Grants Pass wanted to do was to be able to say no camping. And the Ninth Circuit, of course, because it's such an idiotic court, said, "Oh no, that is one of those it's against the Eighth Amendment of cruel and unusual punishment, of which there's been no punishment, but nevertheless they'd said it was, and so bad, that's bad." And so the city of Grants Pass prevailed in this particular thing, and all of a sudden you were able to say you can't be on the streets. And then all of a sudden, that of course has brought up all different kinds of advocacy from people that you're watching. And Ryan, are they the same people that we see funding Antifa, that are funding the homeless organizations?
There is overlap. It's more about creating the ecosystem. So a lot of these so-called independent militants will emphasize, oh, well, we don't have nonprofit entities, but the ecosystem with which they thrive, especially on social media, how the cause gets promoted and attracts people, that does come from nonprofits. And then you have individuals that are in that radical pool that then act on their own accord. And it doesn't mean that they're disconnected from the ecosystem, obviously. And so you have these nonprofit organizations that we list there. And so you'll have the normal housing justice groups, some of which get a lot of government funding on the federal and state levels. And the one criticism of them is that there's no accountability. So it's just free housing for everybody, but then you'll have drug addicts in there, people with mental health issues, and their situation actually gets worse because they get kicked out. It becomes a drug den. The model that Discovery Institute promotes, they say, no accountability. There has to be accountability first. And if you want charities to supply housing as part of that, then you can have that discussion. But you've got to treat the mental health. You've got to get them off drugs, like of course. And so you have those types of groups that just push this general narrative that there is no misbehavior here. That whatever mental health issues they have, whatever drug addiction issues they have, that's because they are economically oppressed. And therefore the police are oppressors. If they sweep an area and make them all move, they don't make them just stand up forever and say, oh, you can't camp and lay down somewhere. There's areas you can't do it because it's interfering with traffic and where people are. And so this kind of merged a bit with the anti-police movement. See that they all kind of like intersected. And so you'll have groups that just think in order for someone to heal from mental illness or drug addiction, they have to have the stability of a home. And so they just go that far with it. And so kind of naively get involved in all this. Then you have the others that are more quite clearly anti-American, oftentimes pro-Hamas. And then you have just the blatant anarchists.
So it all redounds to capitalism, right? Capitalism bad, having to work for your money, that's bad. I mean, I heard that, this housing justice and people don't have houses because they don't have money, and it really is basically that. Or is it just to result in chaos? Is there an objective?
It kind of comes together. So there will be people who, yes, they're just indicting capitalism and it all flows from that. There is they're all victims, and you're a bad person if you say personal responsibility is a thing. So they want like a revolution. But they're focused on, okay, let's just get the homeless people home. Then you have the other people who, tenants unions, like I was saying, will engage in all sorts of activism, and it's kind of like that's just their name. So yeah, they care about the housing justice issue, but they'll get involved in all sorts of anti-police causes, pro-Hamas causes, and those are the more explicitly seditionist ones. But in fairness, there are other pro-homeless advocacy groups that call for subsidized housing or even free housing that aren't part of this. So yeah, housing justice is kind of like the terminology that is favored along the more revolutionary elements. But you'll come across groups that say housing justice without realizing that's where it's coming from. And they don't want any part of that. They just feel people deserve a place to stay. And that's the extent of the thought process.
And usually it has to do with drug addiction, and the places that in state of California where I've done quite a bit of helpful stuff with the homeless. I noticed that we worked for the transitional housing place and just, cooked and stuff like that. Just, and, but what I noticed was there were all kinds of people. They went to group, and we actually got a Bible study in there, and that was able to be used as one of their groups, which was a requirement of them. They were supposed to be sober in this house, and all kinds of things that they were required to do. Look for a job. They had a job board, and they had people helping them. Okay, 2016 happens, and after that, within a couple of years, it was entirely different. No longer did they have to be sober. No longer did they have to look for a job. No longer did they have to go to a group. They didn't want to put any onerous burdens on anybody to help themselves. And you saw an explosion in homelessness. Yeah. And sure enough, California, Oregon, and Washington, worst in the homeless problem. Worst.
Yeah, it's Discovery Institute. Their data shows that it's a real crisis. Like, it's far worse than anyone realized. And I've got to tell you, I know multiple people who I spent a lot of money on to help that ended up homeless, and they're not drug addicted. They're not crazy. Like, it happens a lot to people you wouldn't think, just because a bunch of things go wrong and there isn't a safety net. So emotionally, I gravitate towards this cause. If I have a bias, it's in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
But it's clear to see when you have groups that care about the homeless saying things like, oh, well, there's homeless people in Gaza, as if they don't exist in Israel. Therefore, we have a duty to get involved in the Palestinian issue. And so we support Hamas and
I see.
Their right to resist. They find that angle, and you're like, you know what? Maybe this wasn't really about homelessness for you. Because you just pivoted just like that, and you don't know anything about it. So when someone does that, when they very arrogantly think they have the answer to all these issues, usually, I mean, they could just be jerks, but usually it's because they have an ideology that they think answers all of those questions. So it actually is radicalism.
You talk about in the study that these folks in the housing justice thing, they use the words and terms and outcomes of the radical revolutionaries, as you pointed out. And some of the things that you found were that there's plenty of resources out there. I mean, I could always find you can always find food, always, for homeless people. There's never a dearth of food. There's always available, but they're still out there taking their drugs. But we've talked endlessly about this on this program. But what do you say about the things that are available to homeless people, and why are they still on the streets, Ryan Mauro?
I will tell you the situations that I'm thinking of. The one guy, he found a homeless shelter, but it was dangerous. There was violent, it wasn't good. And then this other woman who went with a teenage daughter who I know, I spent hours. We couldn't find a place. So there are places where they have spare beds, and like I've heard about that in Seattle with Jonathan Cho and other people. But I know of cases where that wasn't the case. So there should be some empathy, but then in other cases, they do have spare beds that aren't being used. So it's complex that way. And to a point that you made earlier, I was talking to Bruce Chapman, who's one of the founders of Discovery Institute, and he taught me a lot about this. And he's explaining to me how, especially in Seattle, the groups that are the most successful, and I've heard this before, are those that have that personal touch, a Bible study,
absolutely,
and it's not because of religious indoctrination, although I mean certainly the faith and the power of that helps a lot of people, but it's that you're spending time getting to know them, and they'll feel that you genuinely love them and have no reason to help them other than you love them. And that sets them on a new course. So it's not even, you're talking about religion, but in some cases it's that, but in the other cases it's just that human relationship. And so these and that will involve personal responsibility, right? Because if you love someone, you're going to say, look, here's the cause, here's the effect. You're not just going to say, oh, do whatever you want because I hope you like me. That doesn't mean you care about somebody. It means you care about yourself. And so the programs that's the most successful are the ones that have personal responsibility, human connection.
What's the old saying?
Talk about politics the whole time.
Right. Exactly. What is it? The old saying is, the people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that's really pretty much it, right? kind of in a nutshell.
I think that opens up the door to change, and it gives people hope. And there's just something that's, I mean, as a Christian, for me, I think it's more than that. But in the cases where it doesn't come to that level, just having that human relationship there and having a mentorship involved makes all the
I think
difference. And if you have that, you've got to help them get someone that can guide them and say, look, we're going to help you, but it doesn't make sense unless you get off the drugs, but we'll help you do it. But gotta get off the drugs.
Yeah, a Union Gospel Mission in Portland does the best job of getting people off the streets. And they preach the gospel, and people just acknowledge a higher power. They don't have to, subscribe to anything in particular. But what they do is they know that they are not alone, and that they have somebody to walk by them to get them out and gainfully employed and all that stuff. But that is the best program in Portland, and the religious programs are always the best programs. But they're not the ones that are necessarily looking for that dough, the NGO money that you saw in all those amicus briefs from
money. Business. It's a huge.
It's a business.
Payer-funded business model.
Yeah.
And so what might happen as a result of this report, because Jonathan Cho gave it to the president on live on TV, basically, and then he met with all the senior officials afterwards, is you might see some sort of actions to cut off that taxpayer money on the state level, on the federal level, and then there's programs where they team up, and it may not be a financial transaction, but the impression I get is that there's real momentum now on this issue, and there's not just the extremism element, just like the issue of homelessness, which should be one of the top issues, doesn't really come up, much less the issue of extremists exploiting it.
Here's where your nexus is in your report. Stop the sweeps. Here's one of them. Stop the sweeps PDX, stop the sweeps in Seattle. And that's fundamentally an effort by Antifa-like individuals to get in the way of getting rid of the homeless camps, because it redounds to their favor.
And then they'll compare that to the college campus, Gaza pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas camps, because they view it essentially as like a base. I mean, they view everything in insurgent terms, seditionist terms. So when we talk about a homelessness encampment, they're saying it the same word, but they're thinking that's our territory, that's a base. And you'll see that in the language. And there's a really cool part of the report where I quote extensively from an account from Stop the Sweeps in Texas, I believe it is, where they talk about how they manipulated the system, how they joined the nonprofit organizations that are getting taxpayer money and have the coalitions and kind of set the template. And then during the breakout sessions, they would radicalize people and then bring them out and then form their own little militant group, not in opposition to them, but I mean, they have difference of opinion, but they would exploit them, and they would get intel from people within the more mainstream pro-homeless people organizations, get the intel that they need. So they got the political access through the commonly accepted mainstream groups, but then we're doing militant things on the streets, fighting police and illegal things like that. And so they really outlined how the whole system works, involving groups that are technically separate, but they still fuel each other.
Wow. Technically separate, but that, they're allies, right? Isn't that what they call themselves? Allies? Allied groups?
Not heated debates, especially because like the Antifa type anarchists really hate the nonprofit industry. So they'll be kind of like you capitalist pig mentality to some of them. Some of them don't have that, but even the ones that do have that attitude will be like, but there's still some use for you. So there's an alliance, but you're kind of dirty because you're a capitalist.
Oh, I can remember being out in downtown Portland. I was doing the Mike Strickland story for this podcast. I did a series of serials of his getting beaten up by Antifa and then having to pull his gun to keep them from hurting him again. And he was put in jail, of course, naturally. And so, but I can remember, to your point, being outside the federal courthouse and the people who were in federal court because of the big clash between Oregon State troopers and the family of people who wanted to use Western farmlands or rangelands to feed their cattle, and the feds told them they couldn't do it anymore. And then somebody got murdered, and this was a federal case in Portland. And I'm outside the courthouse, and here's all these people who look like they just came out of, the Wild West, aligning themselves with people I was interviewing about the Mike Strickland case. And it was just wild. It was just Antifa people and these people, because they came together, because that's what happens, because they have a genuine mistrust of what the government did in that particular case. And they joined together, and I have pictures of them holding hands and holding up signs. And, that's, so you can make sort of a side note, but it's an important one.
Interesting though, is you can see almost, particularly when it comes to the actual homeless people, the level of manipulation and exploitation by the extremists. You can kind of see it visually, because usually you talk about this issue, people think you're recruiting and radicalizing the homeless. I mean, maybe they're talking to them about some of that stuff, but that's like not really where their mind is at. If you're homeless, you're thinking about other things. So the people attacking the cops, visually, I mean, they are dressed semi-normal. I mean, a lot of Antifa people just look weird, but they're more in the normal category than the homeless people. So it's not like they're radicalizing the homeless people and they're saying they're attacking the cops because now they see themselves as jihadists or Marxist insurgents. It's just the militants operate through them. And then they're there, like they're either getting arrested or they're leaving, and then you have these other guys showing up and being like, all right, good, I'm gonna go F the police,
Right. So you also did, because this is just sort of dovetails into your work with the Antifa funding from the big billionaires, and we'll get to that in a second, because I want to get you to talk a little bit about that. But I just wanted to mention a couple of things more in your report on the extremist capture of the homeless industrial complex, housing justice as an ideological gateway, the intersectionality aspect of it, the shift from charitable work to advocacy work, making radicals out of the people they're supposed to be helping, legal protections and tax advantages and what the true intent is, the exploitation of extremist groups. And to let you know, I'm sure since you are talking with the Discovery Institute in Seattle, I fill in on the radio there, which is where you were last time. And so that's why I'm more familiar. And plus I, went to the U and such. But in Seattle's the only place, and maybe one other, that is considering providing homeless addicts with places with a safe supply of drugs. A safe supply of drugs. San Francisco talked about it, never did it. And so Seattle is actually talking about doing it, providing addicts with drugs. That is insane.
Harm reduction, they call it.
Yeah, well, this is beyond that. This is safe supply. They don't do that. They give them all the paraphernalia with harm reduction, which is bogus.
You're talking about actual drugs.
I'm talking about actual drugs. They're talking about doing that.
The needles. Wow.
Yeah. No, this is drugs. Besides the needles, besides the pipe, besides the foil, besides the place, besides the additional help to provide a safe place to do it, they want to provide the drugs.
That's insane, because
it's other level.
I mean, you can see for like 30 seconds, right? You can see the logic of someone being like, oh, we'll give them a safe place to do it, and then hopefully, that leads to a better outcome. But here's the thing. When people engage in destructive behaviors, it's one thing when they do it alone or with a couple of their friends. If you have a central location where they're all going together, there's an exponential effect on everybody, especially the people that are living there. So it does make it end up worse, because you're creating a social circle based around the destructive activity that you're hoping to make less destructive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's insane. So in your work with chasing down where the Soros money was going and the violent extremists that it goes to, in some cases, and the work of Seamus Bruner, who was on the program before also, and tell me a little bit about where that money is coming to fund places and things like Antifa and militancy and on the streets of the country.
So it won't be a direct check to a group like Antifa, because there's that split. Right. You'll have like the more you have groups that pretend to be mainstream but are actually pretty radical. And so you have people like George Soros that are comfortable giving money to them. But then you have, the so-called like true Antifa that wants to show how pure they are, and they'll never have their own nonprofit, but they benefit from the ecosystem. The fact that social media is putting out the propaganda, there's people meeting in the comments section, and they'll say this, they benefit downstream.
Sure.
But then for things like throwing bricks and breaking laws, they'll fundraise, between their friends or themselves, and through like Cash App and things like that. You don't need much money for them. What's expensive is the ecosystem of hate. And so that's what I found with Soros's Open Society Foundations, because what happened was my bias was actually because I monitor, I hate these terms, far left, far right, but like white supremacist, anti-Semitic for many years. And the Soros problem is exaggerated. It is used in anti-Semitic propaganda. And I'd seen that so many times that I figured when I wrote my initial report, Marching Towards Violence, and I was laying out all the pro-terrorist groups organizing the anti-Israel protests, I figured, all right, I'm going to look at the Soros thing, but I'm not going to dig up anything new because everybody talks about it all the time. And most of the time it's exaggerated or false. So like my bias was not like, oh, I need to go find Soros. I thought I wasn't going to find anything. But then I go to his website, the Open Society Foundation's website, where they list their own grants, and they say they only post the ones that they're comfortable posting. If they think posting them will endanger the grantee or themselves, they don't post it. So I was just looking at the ones that they felt comfortable telling the world about. And I kept seeing these groups that I had mapped out showing up over and over again. And I was like, all right, so there's a kernel of truth to this, but amazingly, this is a big knowledge gap, because it turned out that people had written about different grants from Soros going to radical groups here and there, drips and drabs. It turned out nobody had gone through all of it cumulatively and put it together, got a dollar figure, and named them all. And that blew my mind. I was like, all right, well, that sounds like a interesting project. And so I did that. And I came up with the total of the ones I was able to identify. And I couldn't look at every single grant, was over $80 million since 2016, going to 54 groups that are inarguably pro-terrorism, including some that are domestic terrorists that fit the FBI's definition on U.S. soil, doing things like illegal harassment, economic sabotage, where like you block a port, property destruction, rioting, like all of that actually is terrorism.
Wow. Well, keep doing what you're doing, Ryan Mauro. We really appreciate your efforts, appreciate your willingness to come on and talk about it. People will be interested in what you have to say. Don't you worry about a thing. And I was so pleased to see Jonathan mention the work that you've done and the your organization, Capital Research Center, as well as the Discovery Institute, about how the homeless industrial complex has become extremist in so many ways. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you. I'd like to introduce you to Ty King. And Ty runs a YouTube channel called the Triple B Collective, which will be in the show notes. And this is a place where Ty talks a lot about life, what's going on in his world, music, movie excerpts, and that sort of thing. But his strong suit, and indeed the main vein through all of his videos, is his time in Antifa and how he used to run the streets and do bad things and hurt people, and how he's not doing that anymore. And I appreciate him coming on the Adult in the Room podcast. And let's see, I want to make sure I got you. I've got pictures of you. Hey, Ty, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate it. How are you?
I'm doing good. Happy Veterans Day to everybody out there. Had a nice day so far.
Yeah. Tell me what you do with your time now.
A lot of editing, trying to, interview as many people as I can about Antifa, make videos about my time involved. I've spent the last 2 years working on Triple B, not really knowing what I was going to do going into it. I reached out to Buck Angel initially because he was just listening to a lot of people from the left who were leaving and going through a hard time. And then I just had that one interview and I was like, I could have said this, I could have said this, I could have said this, said this. Yeah. And then over the past 2 years, just over 200 videos. They're not always necessarily on Antifa, but just trying to talk to people like me going through a hard time, trying to show the world the things that I like, the music I listen to, the stories of my friends who are also involved in Antifa, and then other circles of life, like really trying to explore the psychology and the underbelly, I think, of what drives a lot of this. A lot of people are focused on like the colleges or the institutions or the workplace. But for me, I've always been very interested in the more criminal side of things. A lot of these people are coming from very dark spaces, drugs, prostitution, abusive childhoods. So that's kind of an angle that I've been very interested in trying to explore.
Yeah. What kind of people are attracted to an organization or a collective group of people like Antifa?
People who are severely...
I tell you, what were you like? And then we can expand that.
Yeah. Well, in my case, it was severely traumatized. I had a lot going on in my life. There's a million stories I could go into from that, but the same could be said for anybody else that I was involved with.
So give me one of your stories. We want to know about you.
Okay. Well, for me, my childhood was rough. I got kicked out of my house at age 15 from my mother and my stepfather's house, and I was sent to live.
Why'd they kick you out?
I was a bad kid. I was causing problems in the neighborhood. I was the kind of kid that'd go around vandalizing things, throwing things, breaking into places I shouldn't break into.
Why?
Treating my friends like crap. I think a lot of it was daddy issues at the end of the day. My father wasn't around from the age of 3, and he was severely abusive. You know, there's a lot of horror stories there. Tried to kidnap me when I was age 3 or 4 from the church. Years and years of stalking me and all my family. But when I was a teenager, I didn't want to believe those stories. So I decided to write to him in secret via Facebook. And it seemed that he had changed. You know, in hindsight, a lot of what goes on in Antifa and a lot of these cult-like groups, I realize is I was manipulated by my father. I was basically locked down, not allowed to have any friends, make phone calls, have no contact with my family for about 2 to 3 years. Whenever I went to live with him, I thought it was going to be the greatest situation in the world. And then it turned into hell on earth. And like I was living in a prison every day to the point where I was contemplating murdering my own father. It got so bad.
Wow.
My father was drug addicted. He spent a lot of time smoking wet, which is embalming fluid, and a lot of other drugs. So he'd see demons. We had military operations happening in our background that was freaking him out. He was connected to different gangsters. So I kind of saw how the psychology goes with underground types as the United States was moving into further chaos. And he just became severely abusive. And, you know, he got involved with a lot of far-right groups like the Aryan Brotherhood and a lot of the white boys in town. So for me, leaving my father and trying to run away from that and then moving somewhere that was such a hotbed of Antifa activity, and we're all against racism and homophobia and Nazis and everything that I saw my father as embodying, that was a big reason why I joined. And that's a big reason why a lot of people join, actually, is very similar, if not more horrifying stories. But then there's also the contingent of people that join because they want trauma and they have no clue what real pain is.
Yeah, trauma bonds are big. People like that, they love trouble with other people. It's kind of sad, but you know, that makes them feel better, I guess. Who knows? Excuse me, can we just go back to the embalming fluid your father was imbibing in?
I was just learning about this recently because I knew he was doing drugs. Well, so a lot of people would steal from the what you call it? Not the mortuary, but the funeral homes, you know?
Sure.
And they'd have embalming fluid. And essentially what people would do is they would dip their cigarettes in it, and then they'd let it dry, and then they'd smoke it. And at least from what I've seen, because I've seen people spiral on it, including my own father, it's kind of like a fentanyl tweak. You just kind of go crazy. You start seeing shadows, hearing voices. It scared my father to death, to where it made him a darker and darker person, to the point where I came home one day and there was nothing in my room but a picture of Jesus tacked up on the wall, because he found some stuff that I was reading, like old occult books and stuff on Wicca. And he was convinced that I was summoning demons into his home, which the older I get, part of me wonders that too. But it's a very dark kind of tweak from what I've gathered.
Yeah. Wow. So you felt he was sort of in a cult, and you were sort of sucked in because you had to, by association, be in his world. And then all of a sudden, how did you break free?
Basically ran away. The day after I graduated, my aunt was willing to take me in, and I was able to move after that. But yeah, that's just such a complicated one, because he tried to come back into my life multiple times, and I tried to come back into his life being like, maybe I was the problem, you know? And then there was always this just toxic back and forth. We'd always just wind up threatening to kill each other. He threatened to gun down my grandma, threatened to kidnap and rape X amount of relatives. And it's just, yeah. Wow. And it sounds crazy. And I guess the reason I'm willing to share it so openly too is because if you're really to look at the childhoods of a lot of people, at least the people I rolled with in Antifa, they can tell you very similar stories. And it's not a justification for what they decide to do with it, because becoming that type of person is not the answer. But if you're looking at an origin story to where a lot of the worst members are coming from, it's really messed up situations like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people who end up being warriors for something oftentimes do have very chaotic backgrounds and are looking for order. And so it's kind of interesting that they end up where they end up. A lot of military vets, and they're, obviously, I believe on the good side, but Antifa on the bad side for me. Okay, so when did you finally sort of involve yourself with these people, and how did you know who they were, and how did you find them?
So it's funny because I've been talking to somebody from Eugene recently, and I guess there's some debate as to this, but at least from what's being presented to me, a lot of the Antifa activity that we're seeing in Portland actually came from Eugene, and that a lot of the Americanization of Antifa started in Eugene.
Oh, I don't doubt that for a minute. Are you aware? Let me just, before we go there, in fact, I was surprised that you were from Eugene. I thought you were from Portland, but I was happy to hear that. When I heard that, I thought, oh, this makes so much sense, because, of course, in Eugene, it was the genesis of so many different kinds of leftist violent action groups. There was the Earth Liberation Front. There was the Animal Liberation Front. Some of the Earth Firsters, of course, a byplay between Portland and Eugene. It was the cradle of those movements, and they found lots of hope. They have lots of support in Eugene as well. So go ahead with your story, though.
Yeah, no, that's the thing is it's all over the place. And you mentioned the Earth Liberation Front. It's funny because, in Eugene, you can just smoke a joint. You could do your drugs openly, drink openly. No one's really going to give you any crap. So one night, I'm smoking a joint out by Walmart. This is probably about a year or two before I joined, but when I was thinking of, I wanted to go figure out what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a guy who he claimed to me that he was a part of the Earth Liberation Front and that he participated in the burning down of a car lot in Eugene back in the 90s.
Oh, yeah, I know that. It was a SUV lot. He's not in prison? I thought that dude was put in prison.
He recently got out from what he was telling me. Now, he could have been lying, but he got very detailed. But we just passed this joint back and forth. And my intention, or my perspective at the time, because I was tweaking, I was a junkie, I was drunk all the time. We laughed about it.
How did you afford that? How did you afford that?
That's where all my money went. I still had a job. It's just I didn't allocate my money properly. I was quicker to buy drugs, and then I'd always be barely making my bills month to month. And then, yeah, it's.
What kind of work were you doing? You must have been really young.
I think worked retail for a while, and then I've worked a lot of restaurant jobs. Being a dishwasher, doing freight. My first job was doing factory work for Tyson, stuff like that. Oh, so I've always basically kind of had a job thing going. Most of my life I was teetering on the edge because of my bad choices with my finances.
Sure.
But a lot of people in Antifa are definitely unemployed. I just wasn't one of them.
I know that some people in Portland's Antifa are some of them are gainfully employed. They just use their night work as to go out there and raise hell. So, So back to you and Eugene, then, the crucible of all things. So you got to know this dude from ELF, and then what happened?
Well, this was just one conversation. This doesn't really tie into all this. This is just like how common it is to run into somebody from that background. Because I'm a dude, I'll talk to anybody on the streets. My favorite thing to do to Eugene was where I was coming from in Texas. People weren't outside all the time like that. You didn't see hippies and art and people going around playing music. People certainly weren't smoking joints in the street.
Yeah.
So I had a place to live, but most of the day I was just walking all around town, taking the bus, going on adventures, meeting new people. And, it's the most common thing you'll get asked in Eugene. Hey, can I bum a smoke? Hey, can I bum a smoke?
Sure.
So I'd sit there, I'd bum a smoke, and I would just have conversations with people. I was never the type to give someone a cigarette or a joint and just walk away. It's like, No, I got a new buddy to make. So I
Mhm.
got to meet a lot of people because of that. But like,
Mhm.
you were to look at least the people that I met in that time, most of them have far left sympathies
Yeah,
and are very
especially in
supportive
Eugene.
of that structure. Yeah.
Mhm.
So over time, you just learn names, you learn where to go, you learn where locations are. And then 2018, when the protests were literally just happening downtown, it's important for people to know I was never like an official member of Antifa. I was always seeking membership, seeking my official place, but I was a
Uh-huh.
part of the Antifa movement. And I think people like me were members in our own right, especially when everybody is, you know,
Mhm.
it's there's varying different levels to it. But I was essentially trying to figure out which organization was right for me, which chapter
Mhm.
itself was right for me. And
Mhm.
I drifted around and I realized that after about 2 years of going around, because probably the first year is more so protest, but then as it started getting more destructive and more crazy, which thankfully Eugene did not have anywhere near close to the amount of destruction that Portland had, thankfully. But there were
Yeah.
still some rough nights. I watched them basically all eat each other alive. They all hated each other. There was no sense of coherency. They were all just they're just so discombobulated. And in my
Mhm.
mind, I wanted to be the better Antifa member because they don't represent the actual movement. These people are just being foolish right now. They need to be educated on what they need to actually do. I'm the smart one. So
Mhm.
what I would do is I would listen to music from the right. I would read Nazi literature. I'd go and look up articles online from
Mhm.
stuff like the O9A or like actual crazy Nazi groups to be like, hey, this is if we're gonna do Nazis, like, look at this.
Mhm.
And that scared them and it challenged them and it makes you an outsider to the cult to where all of a sudden it's like, why would you listen to Tom McDonald? Why would you listen to that by Bryson Gray? Why would you read that book if you're not one of them? And it's like, we don't want any sort of inside knowledge as to how that's working. And they're like, no.
Because it makes it easier just to hate everybody who doesn't agree with you, right? Isn't that
Basically.
really what's going on there? Okay, so you're hanging with these people. And then eventually you sort of ingratiated yourself to them, and I assume because you're hanging with them, and you did for a couple of years, right? So, what was the time frame again for you?
2018 to 2020. I think August 2020
Wow.
was about when I was just like, yeah, I've had enough.
Oh, really? Really? Yeah, I'd believe that you'd had enough by then. That was the George Floyd riot time. What were they doing in Eugene that disturbed you?
Picking fights with people that they didn't need to pick fights with,
Mhm.
watching, everybody just turn on everybody. You could go out there and you could watch a white man call a black man the N word and be surrounded by a group of black people. And instead of getting chastised, everybody just joins in. So it's like, okay, so we're not here to protect black people. Looking at what was happening in the LGBT community, I was always like, I'm going to fight for my non binary friends. I'm going to fight for my trans friends, leave trans kids alone. And then I started educating myself because, hey, I want to look at what the other side's saying. So I'd listen to
Mhm.
people like Blair White, Ariel Scarcella, Buck Angel, all those types of figures and look at the evidence they are presenting. And I'm like, we are butchering children. If we're really about this, we wouldn't support this. And then, of course, that makes you a freaking ultra Nazi to them.
Of
So
course.
it's just so much over a long period of time because there's so
So
much.
there's no introspection, it sounds like, right?
No,
I
none
mean,
whatsoever. And that's what
oh,
the drugs help to disconnect people from because
sure.
they're all on drugs.
You call Antifa the white boy jihad, and that was the first time I heard that, and it was so spot on as far as I was concerned, because these are people who still involve themselves in things that just they have to drug themselves up to do the awful things they do, and then stand back, and of course now they've got blood on their hands and or on their hearts, um, dark hearts, and are sort of sucked in forever. What did you do?
Like, what did I do in terms of
Yeah, I mean, like, you're there, you're hanging with these people, you're thinking you're gonna educate them, but you had to, in order to ingratiate yourself, you had to do some stuff for them and with them, right?
oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I did, because I had different groups of people, right? I had my neighbors that I rolled with, and I went with them on a lot of occasions. And then I'd occasionally meet up with people from downtown. There's a whole downtown sphere aspect to it where a lot of the funding comes from the local bars, and they have people under them essentially that go out and they participate at the higher levels. They took a liking to me. I had a friend who I went out with who I think she was probably working under them and not telling me, but I would walk around with a bucket, taking donations and stuff like that. You just become their useful idiot basically. But in terms of like violence, I always dressed up. I had my black mask. I wore my black clothes, my jacket. I always had a giant machete. I had brass knuckles. I had a hunting knife. I might have a pocket knife. I'd have pepper spray and always go out there. And
Did you go out at night or in the day? Or was that all day long?
both, but I definitely went out at night.
What were you guys doing? Direct actions and such, right?
For me, it was just more so sitting there, just kind of looking intimidating, like trying to show force, like, hey, if they're going to be out there with their weapons, we're going to be out here with ours. Even though realistically, when we had a night where the feds popped off and everything went down, guys like me, we ran for the hills. So it's like,
what happened that night?
So that was one of the nights. This would have been May 30th of, I believe, 2020. I have the date
right after George Floyd.
Yeah, I got this here, but it's a day off because I'm drunk. I was drunk and bad with dates. But basically, it's ACAB. I kind of had it flipped to represent Arkham Asylum because it's all kind of a madhouse, and then the date and the time. But they gave us 3 minutes at trying to angle it there, 10:57, and they gave us a 3-minute countdown to essentially get back to our homes. We didn't have time for that. So we got caught up in the middle of LRADs and rubber bullets being fired and people being traced, drones in the sky. Some guy tried to ram us in his car. But I don't want to focus too much on that because we did.
Oh, I do. I want to talk about that because it tells me the extent to which you were involved, so that it gives people an idea of what you were doing.
Well,
you say you were sort of
that, but the reason that happened is just the thing I want to put in there is because what happened May 29th, because it's a very important part. That's whenever Antifa got all over DC and they stormed the White House and they set the White House lawn on fire and Trump was locked down in the bunker. So that was an activation point for everybody all across the country because in our heads we're like, oh my God, it's finally happening. So what they tried to do the next day is they set COVID lockdowns all over the country to corner off certain areas to kind of control the protest, which is a move I don't agree with the COVID lockdown aspect of it, but it's what happened. So the edge of ours was, do you know where the Whole Foods is in Eugene?
No.
Oh, okay. There's the Whole Foods and it's right next to the federal courthouse. That was the cutoff line for curfew. So basically, whenever Antifa pushed its boundaries and they went towards Whole Foods, then they were met with guns and there was like a parade of federal vehicles. But this was also like one of the first times that Trump set the feds into Oregon when he was first having the idea of labeling them domestic terrorists. So it wasn't actually much of the police force so much as like these were like federal agents.
They were the feds. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, because not only did that happen in DC, I just actually did my Perplexity AI graph. I can pull it up too. I will actually, of all of the DC stuff going on around that time, because of course now they're saying that Antifa was, the story's always been Antifa was never at the January 6th protest when everybody knows they were. And of course they were. And the other thing is that now, of course, now we're finding out that, yeah, sure they were. And how in heaven's name would you miss something like that? I'll just do this real fast. Okay. I just put it in one of my stories.
And what I want to say too, one of the reasons that I know Antifa was at January 6th, all the Antifa channels on Facebook that I were following was saying January 6th, day of chaos, set your alarms, watch out, the fascists are going to take over. And I woke up to January 6th, and then the next day, all the posts were gone.
Oh, interesting. Well, of course, now every time there's any response by the feds to anything being done by the far left, it's always, there's going to be military in the streets and Trump's going to take over. Listen, if Trump were going to take over, he would have done it by now. And and you're not going to believe this. He didn't do a thing about that in his first 4-year term. So isn't it funny? You'd think that he'd established that martial law people keep telling us about back then. But anyway, so you have the post-election. Remember, I don't know if you remember in 2016, this was actually 2017 after the inaugural, there were post-election scrums on the street. Antifa's activated. And this is well before the election, 6 months before the election. And that's when we really started seeing people hitting the streets. Then we've got the post-inaugural Antifa violence against Trump supporters. That's when Rand Paul was beaten up again. His wife threatened. There were other people. There were cars set on fire. People at an inaugural event on Capitol Hill. I think it was at the White House, actually. And then we have lots of different peaceful protests, 2018. there were other, in Portland, there were violent protests, but this is only a DC list, right? And then we have consistent political protests with low violence, BLM protest in 2020, which is when you were active, church burning, Lafayette Square clearing, Trump taken to the bunker, and then in DC, Capitol riot, etc. etc. So there was plenty of stuff going on there for people to say that this was the only riot that Antifa never went to, which was the January 6th situation at the Capitol complex. They've got to be, I mean, they're smoking whatever that stuff your dad was smoking, because they're crazy if they don't think that was happening. So, yeah. Okay. So here you are hanging out with some pretty rough characters. But you lived with a rough character, your dad, right? So, and he was involved with some pretty shady dudes. So here you are. How did you do your, let's say, your first direct action with the Eugene cell of Antifa? How did you find out about it?
Yeah.
Where were you? What was it?
Like I said, direct action for me, that was more of a concept that I would read and like listen to things about, and that they'd educate you on the streets on, because I never found my own chapter or cell necessarily. I would just see things going on, and then I would just try to go on and help. A lot of the time I'd want to de-escalate, but if things were really violent and if I were super intoxicated, then, there was instances of like, at one point there's a parade of officers coming for us, and we're ripping down construction sites, and we're trying to create barriers in the road so they can't come through. And then you have to pick up stones and launch it in their direction to try to get them to back off, which, just want to be very clear on this, never hit a cop, never hit an officer. I threw over, still threw stones, not good. But, and then I'm sitting here, I'm a guy in my weapons. And then it's just like, sometimes if you don't want a certain group of people coming through and it looks like people are forming a wall or a barrier, well, then a guy like me can just cross my arms and I just go over and I just stand with them to make it look like their numbers are bigger. People smashing up things. There was one moment the Chase Bank got smashed up in downtown Eugene, and I was just kind of there, and I instinctually put my arms up with everybody else. And then I remember walking away from that one being like, what? Why? Why? Because I'm sitting here being like, we need to be smarter than this, but also
because they're capitalists.
Yeah, because for a second I'm like, yeah, fuck Chase Bank. I don't want him to get in trouble because they're chasing him with a phone, and I'm just like, oh, this person's gonna get doxxed, then their life's gonna be in danger. When in reality, it's like they're smashing up downtown. Like they should probably figure that out. Like it's just a lot of moments like that. But I'd get in and then I'd be like, what am I doing? Basically. But it doesn't negate any of my participation. I don't want to make it seem like I'm down any of this at all.
Right.
Like I want to be here and be open about it, because I want other people to come forward and be able to say what they did too.
Sure, I know.
Because more people need to.
I saw your interview with Scrub, and I found that fascinating. And we'll play an excerpt from it in just a minute. But I just thought it was a really well done show of yours, and enjoyed it highly. And but what were they saying? What did they say was the impetus, the reason why they were hurting people and breaking things?
We had to fight fascism. Donald Trump was taken over. Anytime anybody stood up for their business, anytime anyone stood up against COVID lockdowns, anytime anyone stood up against any policy that was democratic, or from the Democrat side, the left side.
Yeah.
It's
which in Oregon it all is. So yeah.
Yeah. So to oppose that structure at that point, they saw you as being in bed with the Nazis, which, as someone who's been talking to more far right people lately because of what I've been doing, which has been very fun and very enjoyable. Like people out there probably think I'm becoming a Nazi, but like, no, I'll talk to people who are moderate and conservative and then super, super far right. And they all have the same beliefs, because what I'm realizing with a lot of these far right figures is they don't necessarily want the fascist dystopia. They just see as there's only two options right now. But what a lot of them seem to want is to maintain the current American structure that we have, so that we don't fall into that reality.
Yeah, so that's why they call them conservatives, to serve. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. But I think it's like, so like you'd have people from like the far right, and then they would come to conservative rallies and vice versa. But for people on the far left like me, we'd look at that and it's like, oh my God, they're buddying up. They're best friends now. So everybody's becoming a Nazi. And then, of course, you'd have people in Antifa who, I would just see this all the time on the news. I'm not sure if it ever happened in real life for me, but you'd have Antifa going around and they would be like doing Nazi salutes on the other side or waving swastikas. Like,
what?
That was a tactic that was happening throughout the years. I can't think of many specifics, but it's.
Are you saying that some Antifa people did that to poison? Okay, got it. Because that happened at the Tea Party stuff too.
Yeah, and I think that's what a lot of them did at J6. I think a lot of Antifa members were there, and they were dressed as conservatives. Like,
I
it's
do
just,
too.
it's
I do
so
too.
something in colors.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of proof actually. And a lot of it's coming out right now, which is pretty shocking. Okay, so did they say what their central belief system was? Was it just, how did they say anti-capitalism, which I assume was because they're commies, right? By that time they were full communist, right?
There's some debate to that, and even I kind of wonder, because when I started going to the protests and all this was happening, there wasn't that many hammer and sickles. There wasn't that much overt communism. But as the chaos came through and more people began to go away, I noticed that type of symbolism was coming in much, much harder. In my interview with Brother Scrub, like you mentioned, he believes that Black Bloc was started under very different conditions, and that he believes he saw the Marxist elements come in and take over. So it's very likely that there were aspects of Antifa that were trying to do the right thing. Not saying they're good, but I think that there are some outside or even just internal ideological forces that came in and saw it as, if we can get into this, then we have an army. And I think I might have seen some of that in my time, because as stupid as it is, as evil as Marxist is, there is a lot of people in Antifa getting to it with good intentions. But kind of like, the story of me and my father, a lot of my friends are Antifa. You're bringing in people that are very, very easy to fall for cult manipulation tactics.
Sure. Yeah.
A little bit of empathy, a little bit of faux, like, hey, me too. I've been there. I'll be your friend. You don't seem to have any right now. That goes a very, very long way.
Yeah.
And I think that there was definitely a lot happening in the shadows that I would like to know more about in time, but it gets very dicey on that situation. I don't remember what the initial question was.
Well, I was just thinking the same thing. I think we just wanted to know how they amplified what their central message was, which appeared to be, some anti-capitalism. I've spoken with several anarchists who were all part of that milieu, but they were part of it in 2016, I think before the turn. But I will say this, in all of the Portland leftist activist groups, there have always been a strain of communism through them. And so my guess is, as Antifa actors in Portland go to Seattle and Seattle comes to Portland, Antifa actors in Portland go to Eugene and Eugene come to Portland. It's a very symbiotic. Yeah, exactly. They do cross-pollinate. They are each other. But I would say that things really started getting serious, I would say, during takeovers of public property on Occupy Wall Street in 2010, 11. And that was during the Obama administration. People felt real comfortable doing that. And of course, whenever there would be an Antifa direct action thereafter, it would always be involving taking over their favorite park and that sort of thing. So,
and I want to say on that too, I did meet a lot of people there, not people that I knew too personally, but people that were a part of the Occupy movement. A lot of those people within the first year of my being a part of that, they left pretty damn quick. Like whenever a lot of them saw what was going on, even with all of that, I think a lot of them were terrified and they were like, something's
not right. No, in fact, on the Mike Strickland story, I told you a little bit about that in 2016, where he pulled a gun on a bunch of people who had already beaten him, and then they came back and he pulled his gun. He just drew it. He didn't fire it. And then he, of course, was the one put in jail. But in research for that story, that series of reports on the Adult in the Room podcast, when it was audio only, I talked to a lot of anarchists who didn't involve themselves with this at all anymore. And they were they were the guys that started it, and they said, we're not no. I mean, of course, they're going to tell me, what am I? I'm just somebody caretaking a story. But I mean, I felt that it rang true to me. So kind of interesting. So what kind of characters did you run into? What were the women like, for example, in Antifa in Eugene during 2018 to 2020?
it's going to sound very critical, but it's just the truth. As far as a lot of the women I knew personally, and you know, being a gay guy, I've hung out with more women often than not. Like I have more girlfriends than I do guy friends. Very border personality, border person. So I drink so much coffee today. My words are just.
I know. Have you ever had one of these Celsius things? Oh my
God, I hate them.
There's so much caffeine in there.
And I love them. Like stop caffeine, so whenever I have a little bit, it goes a long way now.
Yeah.
But they're very personality disordered. A lot of them are very egotistical, very narcissistic. A lot of them get very mad when you psychoanalyze them and try to point out their problems. Yeah. You know, you have the standard drug and alcohol addiction, but this is something that's very important because I don't want to sit here and just make it seem like I'm dehumanizing or talking crap. A lot of them have been victims of rape, incest, abuse. A lot of them, the culture in Eugene, like guys can be sleazy in general. I get that. But up there, Eugene is very, very rapey. Very, very rapey.
Rapey?
It's wow. It's and I've seen like things with my own eyes, like girls just getting stalked on the streets. They can't have these girls can't go out anymore without a horror story. So the girls in Antifa, I noticed, they're trying to overcome that fear, overcome that anxiety, become the soldiers for the other women and people in their community who are also dealing with a lot of craziness. But it's kind of how a lot of guys fight their fathers in Antifa. It's really a lot of daddy issues. I think a lot of these women, they have the idea of the oppressor in their mind as being like, that's where a lot of the toxic masculinity comes from, a lot of that type of talk. A lot of them have gone through a lot of sexual trauma, and they see Antifa as a way to become a soldier to where they can be perceived as, it's just like it's a protection blanket, I think is the best way to put that.
In Portland, I see a lot of women, and as according to Chandler Patey, the guy who rents the house that is their safe house near the ICE headquarters, they're a lot of sex workers there. So,
and a lot of them have horror stories, and you know, I'm not going to sit here necessarily and slam sex work. You know, prostitution there's a whole thing. It's
not good for
more
you.
conservative. I become to question it, I think, but
it's not. How about this? How about just keeping it simple? It's not good for you.
It's not. It's really not. You can make a lot of money for sure, and that's how a lot of the girls in Antifa fund themselves. But it's like at what cost? Because like, you know, one person, the one that I was telling you, I did little bucket donations for, who she said it was going to a jail bond. Hell if I know. But she was a sex worker and, you know, identified as non-binary, very, very angry. Her mother had committed suicide years before, and that destroyed her like deeply. And as much anger as I have in my heart for this person for a myriad of reasons, I also can understand. But they were doing sex work. This is how sad this was. So I was there because they're like, hey, you know, I just want to make sure that I'm safe around this guy and, you know, just stay close in case anything happens. And I'm like, you know what? I got you. I'm going to go hang out upstairs with your partner. So their partner, male, female identifying, female or non-binary identifying, but guy, is sitting there broken, playing with Legos on the floor while I'm trying to be quiet. They're both at least in their 30s while I'm listening to my friend get railed downstairs for $1,000.
Wow. That's so sad.
Yeah. And she'd be like, you know, I can buy you supplies and I can help you with this and I can help you with this. And I was just kind of like, let's just hang out. But no, a lot of characters like that and a lot of sad stories like that to where it's like, how would that not destroy you?
Of course, it destroys your soul. It takes a part of your soul. Thank you for being with me for the past 5+ years. And I want to thank all the new viewers of the Adult in the Room podcast. We've more than tripled our viewership and we've got a long ways to go. So please continue to help us. I really appreciate your help. Subscribe, share, clip, give the show a 5-star rating and comment on the show as well. And thank you so much for making this edition of the Adult in the Room podcast highly listenable and I'm highly gratified and continue to do that. Thank you. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this episode of the Adult in the Room podcast. We do not take you for granted. We appreciate every single person who tunes in every week to listen and watch this program. We're here every Tuesday and Thursday, live streaming on Rumble, and then on every other podcast platform shortly thereafter when we can port it over and get it over there as soon as we can. All the shows can be found at victoriataft.com, where the censorship regime has been banned by me. Follow me on social media at these names: Victoria Taft, the Adult in the Room podcast, and The Victoria Taft Show. Send media inquiries, or any others for that matter, to victoria@victoriataft.com. And here's a big ask. Would you please subscribe, share, like, comment, recommend, and give this program a 5-star rating where you can? We really appreciate it. We do not take that for granted either. Follow my work at, you guessed it, victoriataft.com. PJ Media, I write tons over there. Flamingo Audiobooks, and of course the radio. I don't do this alone. This show is produced and engineered by Overall Media. 1A Cast is responsible for some of the Adult in the Room podcast's imaging. Logo design by Hageman Creative. The Adult in the Room podcast is produced at Flamingo Road Studios. All rights reserved.